Welcome back to the Food52 Test Kitchen. Today we are making a Chinese dish called 赛螃蟹, which I have translated into velvet egg white crab. Now, I understand that the name of this dish includes the word crab, but this dish itself includes no crab. It's an interesting investigation and exploration of the textures that eggs can achieve. We're going to show you this recipe today because I think it's interesting, even if it's not going to be your go-to way to cook eggs. Fun little history to this. 赛螃蟹 in Chinese means mock crab. But 赛 it's not really Mandarin, it's not modern Chinese. It's a word most likely from Manchu. But this is a period of Chinese history called the Qing Dynasty when an important emperor, Dowager Empress Cixi Taihou, she wanted crab one day. And in the court, the chef didn't have any crab and was fearing for his life, and so decided to come up with this. The court at that time would have been in Beijing, which is a little bit further away from the ocean, so they couldn't get crab last minute. So he devised a way to approximate that crab texture with eggs. Before we get going with the egg itself, there are some optional garnishes that we need to prepare. The broccoli in particular comes through a long Chinese tradition of putting garnishes that look pretty that have nothing to do with the dish itself. Useless garnishes are really important in a lot of Chinese cooking, and broccoli is one of them. This broccoli has been broken down to nice little florets, and all we have to do is throw them in hot water, blanch them, plunge them in ice water, get them nice and green, and Nikki is going to be doing that for me. Thank you, Nikki. Okay. Salt it, season it, make sure it's good. Okay, the second garnish is going to echo on the fact that we are playing with seafood flavors, even if there isn't actual seafood inside. So we're going to be adding some dried scallops. If you haven't worked with dried scallops before, in Cantonese we call this 干油曲. They are very popular in a lot of East Asian cooking, specifically Southern Chinese and also Japanese cuisine. So you can buy this from a lot of East Asian grocery stores. I'll tell you why dried seafood is so important. Drying seafood removes the moisture, concentrates the flavor in that ingredient. Scallops specifically, they can get very expensive if you get really nice whole untarnished pieces. They can also get expensive depending on where they're coming from. But for this purpose, again, this is a garnish. All we need are the cheaper broken pieces. That's totally fine. In order to prepare these, it does take a little bit of time. First, you have to soak them in water so that they fully hydrate. I like to have them overnight. Afterwards, you're gonna have to steam them to cook them and actually to get them to soften. They'll look then something like this. Some pieces, some strings. Fresh scallops don't have this texture. Dried scallops that are then rehydrated and steamed are going to have this texture. They're gonna break apart quite nicely, reminiscent a little bit of the fibers inside of a crab. The only way to do this with fresh scallops is to dry them and then rehydrate them and then steam them and then break them apart. So many people all along the food chain have put so much effort into coaxing the flavor out of the scallop. It is our job before we sprinkle it on top of our dish to coax the final little bit of flavor out of it. And the way we're going to do that is just by stir frying it a little bit with a little bit of oil. So I'm just breaking it apart into little strands, and I have a little pan going at medium high. Just a tiny bit of oil. Wait for it to shimmer. And we're going to basically toast this off a little bit. Just stir frying it till it's aromatic. We don't want to see too much color in this, just a gentle activation of it. Coax out that flavor after it's been steamed. Okay. It's popping. Keep that to the side for later. And also when you're done with your broccoli, you want to keep your broccoli on the side as well. So our next step is to prepare the vinegar. So if you've had crab before in Shanghai, Shanghainese crab is usually served with a specific type of vinegar for dipping. The idea is that this vinegar cuts through some of the richness and the gaminess of that crab. So we're going to be approximating that vinegar. You might assume that the vinegar just comes out of a bottle. That's not true. It needs to be doctored a little bit. It needs to be balanced. So that's what we're going to do today. First of all, vinegar. Today I'm using Chinese black vinegar because it's easy to get. Most traditionally, if you were in Shanghai or in the region or even in China, you might be able to buy vinegar that's specifically made for crab dipping that would already be seasoned, in which case you don't need to do this. But Chinese black rice vinegar, we're sweetening the vinegar today with a little bit of sugar to balance it out, a little bit of honey for sweetness and complexity, and finally with just a touch of soy sauce to give it a little bit of that umami body. This black rice vinegar in Chinese is called 镇江醋, or 清江is an old transliteration of this vinegar, is black because of its black glutinous rice that is the starting. I'm just mixing it up a little here so that the sugar dissolves and the honey dissolves. But the final element here is actually ginger. Ginger is an incredible ingredient used for a lot of seafood dishes because it helps get rid of, again, some of that fishiness and some of that gaminess. A nice fine strips. If it's too thin, it's going to end up breaking down too much. So you do want a little bit of structure, so not super, super crazy thin. This ginger goes into the vinegar. Let it soak all together for a little while. Let the ginger flavors get into the vinegar. Let the vinegar flavors get into the ginger. Mix it up. Let this sit at least 5 minutes just for everything to come together. Time to make the egg yolk sauce. So this egg yolk sauce is an approximation of the delicious gooey bits inside of the crab, also known as a tamale. So in order to get that, we need fattiness, rich like butter, but we also need a big punch of savory and umami. That umami is going to come from salted egg yolks. Salted egg yolks are duck egg yolks, most of the time, that have been cured in salt. You can buy them as is in a pack, just like this, bright orange, vacuum sealed, in many, if not most, Chinese grocery stores. But you can also buy these as part of salted duck eggs. Salted egg yolks are very popular because they have a pretty unique taste. It's really difficult to replicate them. Their texture is a little bit sandy, but people who love salted egg really, really love salted egg. The eggs for the mock crab itself are going to be egg whites. So the egg yolks that we have after we've separated the egg yolks and egg whites, of which we're going to use 2. So 2 egg yolks here. That's the texture we want and a little bit of that moisture with some of this salted duck egg yolk. 2 of them. Before we cook this egg yolk sauce, it's best to crumble it, mash it a little bit so that it comes together seamlessly or a little bit more quickly. Just to finish this project of grand tamale deception, a little bit of rice vinegar to balance out that richness, a little bit of Shaoxing wine to get rid of some of that gaminess, but also give it a little bit of that floral accent, and then a little bit of salt for flavor. Mash it all together, mix it all up. When this cooks, the egg yolk is going to melt, so don't worry too much about getting this into a fine consistency. We're going to be just stir frying this sauce a little to get everything to come together and melt. Wait for that to heat up on medium, medium-high, and the egg yolk mixture can go in. Slowly just keep cooking it. You need a generous amount of oil here because we're not making scrambled eggs so much as we're trying to incorporate some of that oil into the egg itself because it is a sauce, so to speak. This is foaming up immediately, and I'm just mixing this around a couple of seconds until it starts to pick up a little bit of that delicious caramelized color. For all of you internet warriors on there who know Chinese food better than I do and ever will, I know that a lot of different places like to make their saipanxie egg yolk component a little bit differently. I think fully cooked egg yolks are delicious, which is why I actually like to cook them pretty much fully, almost until they're brown. If you really want to get into why, there's an egg fouillon recipe out there where I cook that out of the eggs, and I just think the flavor of that egg is delicious, so that's what this is. Egg whites are in the bowl. Now we are going to add our milk. Whole milk, nice and white. Before I pour all of it in, I'm going to add my cornstarch into my milk just to get it to dissolve so that it doesn't clump when I add it to the larger mixture. The cornstarch here is important because just like our Hong Kong style scrambled eggs, the cornstarch is going to help the oils, the fats, in the milk itself and some of that frying liquid emulsify with the egg itself, giving us that nice, silky, soft texture that we're looking for this dish. That's gonna go in. Salt is going to help the egg set. Adding it a little bit early is a little bit helpful. It's not super helpful, but it's a little bit helpful. Sugar to balance out some of that flavor, give us an illusion of the natural sweetness of crab, and a pinch of white pepper. Okay, so we're just whisking this up now with all of our ingredients inside. You want to make sure that the clumps of egg white are all broken up. You don't want this to foam too much like a meringue, but you want to make sure everything is dispersed and the salt and the sugar, as much as possible, is dissolved in the liquid. We are going to be cooking this egg in a generous amount of oil, which means that for me, this is not an everyday dish because I'm not interested in consuming that much oil. We're not deep frying this, however. We are frying it at a relatively lower temperature. Now, the question is, what temperature are we frying it at? If this is too high, this is going to become almost egg fouillon-like. We actually want to cook this at somewhere between 212, which is where water evaporates, to 275, 300-ish. We do not want any color in this. We want the oil, which is a very conductive liquid, to envelop as much of the egg as possible so that when it comes to the surface and it bubbles up and that water brings it to the surface, it becomes nice and silky and fluffy. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but your wooden chopstick has a tiny bit of moisture into it. If you stick it into oil and you see little bubbles start to appear, you know that you're at water boiling temperature, which is 212 Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius. The speed at which it bubbles should indicate with some experience what temperature the oil is going to be, but honestly, I think it's only helpful to the extent that it's starting to bubble like this. When this egg is going to go in, it's going to sink to the bottom and eventually float to the top. I want to continuously mix it to create these lumps, kind of like crab. A little bit of a sizzle, but mostly on the bottom. That is good. Mix it, keep mixing it until it starts to float like this. It's floating when the water inside is boiling and coming to temperature. And slowly increase the heat. Just keep mixing it and pushing it around. You can use a spatula as well. Okay, now you see these nice little fluffy lumps. Take that out once those are set. These are going to cook very quickly. I'm putting them in a colander over a bowl to get most of the oil to drain out. Some that are more health conscious or otherwise will actually do this and run this through hot water. If you had a pot of hot water like you would in a Chinese Cantonese style kitchen, you could just dip this into water to hot water to rinse off some of that surface grease. That is also possible. All right, now we're going to plate. First and foremost, useless garnish, broccoli on the bottom of the plate. With my clean hands, I'm going to delicately arrange this broccoli into a circle. Broccoli is got nothing to do with the stuff on top, but it looks good because otherwise it would be white and orange. Okay, ring of broccoli, and then the egg white itself. I was telling everybody just a little bit earlier, it's actually quite important for Chinese food to be hot when it's hot and be served at their proper temperature. I don't know very many cuisines more picky about their temperature of the food than Chinese cuisine. And in this case, once this egg white starts to cool, it deflates. What was once oily, delicious fattiness then gets perceived as grease. So that is also something to keep in mind. Okay, so egg white, broccoli, and then the yolk just over the top like a regular egg. And then just to remind people that this is somewhat of a seafood dish, we're going to add seafood. Here is a little bit of that dried scallop. I would think optional, but it is a premium luxury ingredient. And then that vinegar, I personally actually like to serve on the side because when you pour it over the egg white, it'll make it brown. Some people like to spoon that onto their plate while they're eating this, or you can drizzle it over the top. But since crab is served with the vinegar as a dipping sauce, I think it's appropriate to have it on the side. This is a velvet egg white crab dish. It is an old school historical dish probably a texture of egg white and egg yolk that you're not used to. So let me know what you think.
All right.
Cool. There are a lot of like components to this that could be a part of other dishes.
I think the texture is very reminiscent of crab. I think it's very yummy.
Quite yummy.
I would eat the whole thing.
So that's the velvet egg white mock crab. If you want to get a copy of this recipe, the link is in the description box below. Let us know if you make this recipe. Let us know how it turns out in the comments. And if you'd like to explore other interesting egg textures, we have a recipe for egg fouillon. Get that on Food52.